Thank you. All right, so welcome everybody. Welcome GANYC members to the November monthly membership meeting. We're just getting started. We're letting people slowly into the webinar. I see the numbers are going up, so we'll start in a few more minutes. I have a tickle in my throat, excuse me. So good evening, everybody. Hey, Hermit. All right, so we have some people already posting. And we're going to have a very interesting and I think a fun discussion tonight with our borough historians. As Jeremy is reminding us, if you would like your comments to be seen by everybody, make sure you're sending them to all in the chat. You can use the Q&A. The Q&A is for questions to our illustrious guests. For four of the five borough historians, just missing Staten Island. So good evening, everybody. Yes. Hi, Debbie. Thank you. Okay. And so everybody will be muted unless you are going to be speaking. And we'll get started in just a few more minutes. I'm letting a few more people come in. We're already up to 70 participants. Okay, so let me just go over the agenda quickly. And everyone should see it in the chat. There is a link to the agenda in the chat, so you're welcome to find it there. So after my report, we're going to have a panel with four guest speakers, four of our city's borough historians, and Kevin Lawrence will moderate the discussion. You'll see the gentleman here. We've got Robert Snyder, Manhattan Borough Historian, Jack Eichenbaum, Queens Borough Historian and GANYC member, Lloyd Ultan, Bronx Borough Historian, and Ron Schweiger, the Brooklyn Borough Historian. So after our discussion, we will then move on to committee reports. There are only 3 committees giving reports tonight: education, membership, and the newsletter. And then we will have any other business that should come up, and you're welcome to, again, put that into the Q&A as well as in the chat. Okay, so we'll wait maybe another half a minute. I'm just checking the participants. Yeah, we have 64 people on plus our 11 panelists. And let me just see. All right. So yeah, and you can all see a few welcome words in the chat. All right, so let's get started. We're missing 2 of our board members. Deb is en route, and Christina, I'm afraid she couldn't make it, so she just sent her greetings to everybody. But where to begin? And I never quite know what to say to start our meetings, but I hope everybody's okay. I just really do. I've been thinking about, everybody all day long, trying to send out positive energy as much as we can muster. This is really a time for self-care. All right, take a walk. If you can go outside, I went walking outside, just crunching through the leaves, that'll lower your blood pressure right away. If you have a cat, let the purring lower your blood pressure. Take your dogs out for a walk, talk to your goldfish. All right, you take care of yourselves. We all really need to do this. And the pandemic, the election, the stores boarded up, all that is raising our cortisol levels. So let's all take it down. And that's really all I'm going to say about it, is just everybody, please take care of yourselves. Love your family, love your friends, call somebody up, and really try to center yourselves for a moment and maybe catch a breath and feel just try to get yourself a little at peace. Okay. So that said, that out of the way, we'll sort of deep breath in, the box breathing, however you're going to do it. Let's move on to more pleasant things, starting with our very own Mike Morgenthal, who was recognized by groups today. So bravo, Mike, recognized by groups today for his work in tenacity in tourism. That was the name of the prize he won, tenacity in tourism. And I have to say, nobody is more tenacious than Mike, okay? Now, the board has sort of ratcheted everything down. But at the beginning, I think Mike and I were texting or emailing or calling each other literally every day and a few times a day. Mike was on all the time. And anytime a project came up, Mike was like, I'll do it. I'll do it. I'll do it. And in fact, a couple of times we're like, Mike, you don't have to do every single thing. But what he really did and what he took the initiative with and what he ran with and created for all of us is Tour Your Own City. So Tour Your Own City, as you know, is our platform, is our website for tour guides to place their tours and to get hyper-local and local tourism. You know, we can still have visitors coming in from the tri-state, but even just from borough to borough, this is a way for GANYC members to really show the best they have to offer. And Mike and GANYC were recognized for it, but it's really Mike who did all the heavy lifting. I don't know how many sleepless nights he had, how many, you know, he's taught himself code, he's taught himself WordPress, all this stuff. And so it's really, Mike did a fantastic job. We had a lot of support and backup from other GANYC members as well, but it's really, the kudos goes to Mike. And so his prize, tenacity in tourism, is well-deserved. And he put the link in the chat. So Mike, thank you, thank you, thank you. We are forever in your debt. So cheers to Mike. And yes, and one of our members, Mark, he got a tour with Tour Your Own City. I believe Jeremy got a tour with Tour Your Own City. Yep. So even if guides aren't getting tours booked directly thanks to Tour Your Own City, they're getting hits on their websites. Okay. And that's how we get noticed. And that's how people know that tourism is not dead. Guides are here and we are ready to go. And we can take you around our city in the safest way possible and really, you know, show you a good time and let you get to know New York all over again. So thank you, thank you, thank you, Mike. All right. So congratulations to Mike and Tour Your Own City. This is something for GANYC members. And what does that mean? You want to be a member. And what does that mean? That means renew your membership. November is when we start our membership renewal. A lot of you should have already received an email that tells you exactly how to renew your membership. And so you just follow the clicks, go right through Wild Apricot. You can pay with PayPal, you can pay with your credit card. If you really must send us a check, you can have an invoice printed and you can mail that in to our offices, to the WeWork office down on Broadway, okay, down 25 Broadway, down on Bowling Green. So, you know, please renew. GANYC offers you so much, not just Tour Your Own City, not just a discussion, I mean, a panel discussion with 4 of our 5 borough historians, PDPs, right? We have the marketing seminar. We have access to digital tours. Thanks to being a member of GANYC, you can join the IATDG big conference that's coming up. You're invited to the Trip School conference that just happened. Tomorrow is this huge long Trip School arrival day. I'm sure I'm going to see everybody on screens all day tomorrow. I think I'm going from 10 to 3 o'clock in the afternoon. All these different things online and then live too. Okay, we are offering now our wonderful FAM tours again. You can give a FAM tour. Monia Bonaldo is going to be giving a FAM tour of the foliage in northern part of Central Park. If you have a FAM you'd like to do, get in touch with the education committee and do that. These are all things that are just for GANYC members. And so your membership goes a really, really long way. All right. And we hope you are finding you're getting your money's worth. We have had a lot of people renew already. We sent the renewal notice on November 1st. And Jeremy, I think we were at 50 already, like bing, within 2 days. Yeah, we got 50 people already. So the interest is there. We want people to stay and we really, care for and admire and esteem our members. So come on, make sure you renew. And I see a couple of people have raised their hand. We're not going to be calling on people. So if you have a question, rather than raise your hand, please write it in the chat or write it in the Q&A. Okay. Our membership dues are $125 for the full year. So they are valid right through December, but we start the renewal in November. But this is for the entire year of 2021. Can't wait to get out of 2020. So it'll be nice to have our renewals for 2021. Okay. Yes. And as Kevin said, so I mentioned FAM tours. You can propose them to the education committee. We have an online form. FAM tours are great ways not only to learn from other guides, but this is the best way to practice your tours. Okay. It's the scariest way to practice your tours, but it is the best way to practice your tours. And you guys know we don't hold back. We will give you all the information you want and more. Information you didn't even know you wanted. So that's what Fan Tour is one of the great draws. The other thing that people are interested in when they become members is insurance. We will be getting all the numbers and all the information for that, you know, and then over the next couple weeks. Okay, so hold your horses with the insurance, but please, please renew your membership. Okay, so I think that's it. I sort of 3 things to check off: mic, membership, and take care of yourselves, everybody. Okay, so please enjoy yourselves, you know, enjoy your own time. Self-care, very, very important. So one thing I would like to mention, I will be stepping out probably be another 15-20 minutes or so, and I'll leave you in the very capable hands of Mike and the rest of the board. Tonight is my daughter's 21st birthday, and much as I love GANYC, there she is. So she just finished her online ballet class, so everybody's in. So anyway, so Nikki, I have a 21-year-old, which is kind of crazy. So this girl, she's having a martini tonight. I'm having 2, she's having 1. All right, so, okay. So with that said, all right, I'm going to turn it over to Kevin, who's going to start our panel. Okay, so thanks everybody. Kevin, take it away.
Thank you, Emma, and happy birthday, Nikki. I'm sure it's the first martini you'll ever have. As Emma mentioned, we're very privileged tonight to have 4 of our 5 borough historians. We did reach out to Thomas Mateo, the Staten Island borough historian, and unfortunately we were unable to connect with him, but we are well represented by the other boroughs today. I'm just going to briefly read their bios, but you can also find those bios in the link that was put in the chat by, I believe, John Semlick put that in there, and their bios on the back. But we're joined, and I'm listing these not alphabetically by the historian's name, but rather by the borough's name. So that's the fairest way that we could do this, right? And so we're joined by Lloyd Ultan, who is the Bronx, Brooklyn historian. He is also an author. A native of the Bronx in New York City, he's been the borough's historian since 1996. So I think he's probably the longest borough historian here. He's a professor of history at Farley Dickinson University's Petrocelli College of Continuing Studies, and is a member of the adjunct faculty at Lehman College. Professor Ultan received his BA in history from Hunter College in 1959 and an MA in history from Columbia University in 1960. He's written several books, including The Beautiful Bronx, 1920 to 1950, The Bronx in the Innocent Years, 1890 to 1925, and Bronx Accent. Professor Ultan is renowned for his walking tours, and we're lucky to have him here today. So thank you for joining us, Mr. Ultan, Professor Ultan. And we also have Ronald Schweiger, who is the Brooklyn borough historian. He's a retired high school science teacher and was appointed the Brooklyn borough historian in 2002 by Marty Markowitz. He has contributed to numerous books on Brooklyn history, and in 2007, he was featured in the 2-hour HBO documentary, The Brooklyn Dodgers, The Ghosts of Flatbush. As Brooklyn borough historian, Mr. Schweiger has appeared frequently in both print and broadcast media, including the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, New York One, and the National Public Radio. In 1983, Mr. Schweiger was an official guide for the centennial celebration of the Brooklyn Bridge, and again in 2008 as it celebrated its 125th birthday. For the past 35 years, Mr. Schweiger has conducted numerous walking tours and bus tours through some of Brooklyn's historic communities. He has also presented lectures and slideshows of old Brooklyn using his collection of nearly 3,000 slides of old Brooklyn streets. And very curiously, in 2006, he spent a week in the Great Plains chasing tornadoes with a professional tour group. Maybe he'll tell us a little bit about that. And then we are joined by Dr. W. Snyder, who is the Manhattan borough historian. He is also a professor emeritus of American Studies and Journalism at Rutgers University, the Newark campus. Most recently, he is the co-author of All the Nations Under Heaven, Immigrants, Migrants, and the Making of New York, and the author of Crossing Broadway, Washington Heights and the Promise of New York. He is a member of the New York Academy of History, and in 2016 was a Fulbright lecturer in American Studies in South Korea. And finally, many of you will know Jack Eichenbaum, who, as Emma mentioned, is a GANYC member. He is the Queensborough historian, and he is an original charter member of the Greater Flushing Chamber of Commerce, which he worked closely with to organize walking tours of Flushing and to promote the history and culture of the Queensborough community. For much of his career, Mr. Eichenbaum worked in the property division of the New York City Department of Finance, collecting data and modeling valuations of tax parcels. Jack founded and coordinated Gizmo, New York City's Geographic Information System, GIS user group. He actively participates in the Municipal Art Society and serves on the Board of Trustees of the Queens Historical Society, as well as teaches at Hunter College. As Queen Borough historian, Mr. Eichenbaum advises Queens Borough President Melinda Katz. He convenes people and organizations concerned with Queens history, educates and promotes Queens history-related attractions and changing cultures, and works to expand the concept of digital history. And you can learn more about Mr. Eichenbaum at GOGNYC.com, and I'll put that in the chat. So welcome to one and all, and thank you so much for joining us tonight. So we heard in those introductions a little bit about how you became historians and how they're related to the presidents of the different boroughs. But can you give us a better sense of what the role and the function of a borough historian is? As an institution, do they interact with one another? Do they derive from the city? Is it paid? I think a lot of our members would be very curious. So if you could tell us how you became a borough historian and what you see your purview is and your role and function in your borough. And why don't we start with Lloyd? Would you like to? So you're on mute, just so you know, you need to unmute yourself.
Okay. First of all, the role of the borough historian is established by New York state law. It says that every county in the state should appoint a county historian by the local appointing authority, and in the 5 counties that are the 5 boroughs of the city of New York, they are officially called borough historians. Now, it says in the New York state law that the historians are supposed to hunt out, preserve, and protect all sorts of documents and records and things like that, so that they are not destroyed. And also they are supposed to write an annual report to give to the New York State historian and to the appointing authority for every year. Now, in the borough historians, the appointing authority is the borough president. So our relative borough presidents appoint us, and we serve at their pleasure, which means we can be fired at any time. Now, by that state law, we are supposed to get a 6-figure salary, but unfortunately, by that very same state law, all 6 figures are 0. It says specifically that we are not to be paid unless the mayor of the city of New York says otherwise. And no mayor of the city of New York says otherwise. It isn't in his vocabulary. In any event, I was appointed in 1996 when Fernando Ferreira was the Bronx borough's president, and I have been reappointed by his 2 successors thereafter. And it's a strange thing. I'm the 4th person to occupy that office. It seems that in the history of the Bronx borough historian, a person enters the office vertically and leaves it horizontally. Nobody has ever fired a Bronx borough historian. So when my immediate predecessor passed away when he was in his higher 90s in age, I got a call from the borough president's office, and they said, "Would you like to be the borough historian?" And I said, "Well, let me wait a second." Yes, and and that's what I became. Now, beyond what is officially said what a borough historian is supposed to do in the law, each one of us can shape the office the way we want to. And I, being a professional historian, and I got a reputation and the invitation from the borough president's office because I have written a couple of books before that telephone call. I have continued to write books. I have written over 1,000 articles that have appeared in newspapers, even though there's only 3 articles in the English language. I've also have given lectures, and not only in the Bronx, but I've been invited as far away as California to give a lecture. And I've also given tours, and some people say I give great tours. I don't know why, but they say they say that. And the so that basically is the way the office is held. I also have through mail and telephone calls and other communications devices receive questions from various people and asking me about various aspects of the history of the Bronx, and I try my best to answer them, and I certainly do. The last two had something to do with an artificial insemination experiment, and the person was a product of it and wanted to know more about it. And one wanted to know about what he had seen in a videotape, Ronald Reagan speaking behind in front of a banner that said Patent Center, Bronx, New York, and wanted to know where it was and what it was, and couldn't find anything. Well, I just found out where it was, and it was 1965. And when William F. Buckley was running for mayor, that was his Bronx headquarters. So that's what it was called. It was the General Patent Center for William F. Buckley, and it was located on Fordham Road near the Fordham station of Metro North. That's the kind of thing that I do. And I find it very interesting. I also get inquiries from newspapers and television and radio and podcasts and things like that. So that is the sum total, basically, of what I do.
No, that's really very informative, and I didn't know that about the state law for the historians. So that's great. And Ron, you also you told me a story about fielding some of the interesting questions that also Lloyd was just speaking about. Maybe you want to mention that, but it's your turn now to answer how you see your role as historian and what you do.
Okay, thank you, Kevin. Let's see. I've been appointed in 2002, so it's been 18 years now, and the most unusual request that I've received was, I would say about 8 or 9 years ago. I received a letter in the mail where the return address was the Attica Correction Facility in upstate New York. And immediately I said, oh my God, one of my former students is in jail. Thankfully, it wasn't that. It was a person in jail. I have no idea what his crime was or whatever. I didn't ask him. And in his letter, he said that he is writing a historical novel about Brooklyn in the late 1800s, 1860s, 1870s, and 1880s. And he would like to know if I could supply him with a map of the proposed the development of Prospect Park. Now, Prospect Park was developed after Central Park, and in my opinion, they improved on Central Park. And it's a map from the I would say the late 1860s or right around 1870. And I didn't have the map. I went to the Brooklyn collection at the Grand Army Plaza Library in Brooklyn, which is the main branch, and it's called the Brooklyn Collection.
I'll second the motion, John Sumlock.
And all of a sudden, somebody's picture just showed up on the screen here.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. It just glitched there. Don't worry about it.
All right. And I showed them the letter, and they kind of smiled, and they said, Ron, wait right here. And they brought me 2 copies. It said, one is for you, and one is to send to this gentleman up in Attica. So I wrote a note to put in the envelope with the map, wishing him well, good luck with your project. And then I thought to myself, maybe he would like a modern, up-to-date map, a current map of Prospect Park. So those are available for free. So I got that, and it's in full color. The original one from 1870 is in black and white, of course. And the new map is very similar. It shows the streets around it, but it also included along the borders of the map a lot of the commercial establishments in the neighborhood of Park Slope, where Prospect Park is. So I figured I'd send that along with it. Maybe he'd like that. So I sent it away. About 8 or 9 days later, I received a thank you note from him, thanking me so much for it. 3 days after that, I received another envelope from the Attica Correction Facility, but it was not from this gentleman. It was from the warden, with the new map returned, marked, ready for this? What's the word I'm thinking of?
Contraband?
Contraband, thank you, contraband. It was stamped contraband because it's not something that he requested. I couldn't believe that. I really couldn't believe that. But that was among the most interesting of the requests that I have received. I grew up in the Gravesend area of Brooklyn. And I went to Ebbets Field as a kid. 1/3 of my basement is Brooklyn Dodgers memorabilia. And I started, I would say, in the 1970s, right after my wife and I got married in 1969, we lived in Flatbush. That was our first apartment. And we knew nothing about the neighborhood. So we started walking around to see where's the shopping, where's the nearest subway station. And I got interested as we were walking, looking at these beautiful turn of the century Victorian homes. And I said, wait a second, these are the homes we see from the subway. And if you know Brooklyn, the B and the Q train run smack right through the community. And when you look out the window from the train, you see these homes, but I never knew where this neighborhood was. And now we were living in that area, in an apartment house, not in one of those homes. And I started getting interested in the architecture and the history of the neighborhood. Well, to make a very long story short, I started searching and looking and collecting a lot of Flatbush old photos, documents, maps, postcards, and so on.
So that's how you got started.
And Marty Markowitz, who was the borough president at the time, who appointed me in 2002, we've known each other now, let's see, it's 2020 now. I'd say about 35 years we know each other from the Flatbush neighborhood when he was a state senator. And
so you had the inside track there.
2 months before his inauguration to speak at his inauguration and give the history of Borough Hall, which was originally Brooklyn City Hall before the consolidation.
Right.
So
okay.
I gave the talk, and the
rest is history. The rest is history.
And the rest is
history. Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right. So Robert Snyder, sorry, getting very familiar with you.
Fine.
Yeah. How did you come about? So you taught history for a while, and so tell us about your journey and your role.
So I moved through a lot of different phases of a career as a historian. I taught, I worked on documentary films. I worked at Newsday for a while and helped produce a book there called City of the World, New York and Its People, written by one of the senior editors. But for the last 20 years of my life, until I retired just this past July, I taught American Studies and Journalism at Rutgers Newark. And I wrote about New York City and really worked really hard to try to build bridges between universities and cultural institutions and the communities around them. I really believe that history is best when it's shared with a really broad public and ideas flow in all directions. And there's a generous conversation that goes in there and brings in all the widest array of voices possible. So Gail Brewer, I think, learned about me because she goes to every public event conceivable in the borough of Manhattan. And in 2015, I was launching a book that I had written at Coogan's, a great bar in Washington Heights that has become a casualty of COVID. And the book was called Crossing Broadway, Washington Heights and the Promise of New York. And it was really a book about New York City from the 1920s to the present through the prism of one neighborhood, and how the people there overcame many different problems to create the neighborhood that we know of in Upper Manhattan today. where once upon a time there was a great threat of crime. Today, the big fear that people have is rising rent increases and gentrification and displacement. So I wanted to talk about how that neighborhood where my parents lived when I was a kid got from the past to the present. Gail heard me talk and called me back, I guess 4 years later, and said, was I interested in being Manhattan Borough historian? And I said yes, because I knew I was approaching retirement from Rutgers and I wanted my last job, paid or unpaid, as Lloyd has pointed out, to be a job of service to New York City. So I gladly took it up and set about doing the kind of work that I've been doing for a long time now, which is to try to create a discussion between historians who work in universities, historians who work in their communities and libraries and museums, to see what we can all learn from each other. COVID killed off the first project that I planned to do in that, which was a Manhattan history workshop, where we would have invited a lot of people into the borough president's building, the Manhattan Municipal Building, for a one-day workshop on how to do everything from the great work that guides do, to researching the history of your neighborhood, to doing oral histories and learning more about the different facets of Manhattan's amazing history. But when that shutdown happened in COVID, I decided to try to move my work in two different new directions. One was to just do more work on Zoom, and I still do that today, participating in Zoom conversations about history, moderating conversations with authors, doing interviews for the New Books Network, and that's been a lot of fun. I've enjoyed that immensely. But I also, when the COVID situation erupted, it became very clear to me that I just don't know anything about the history of medicine. I don't know anything about the history of pandemics, and I get queries all the time. So I started by finding two very good historians of medicine, David Rosner and Janet Golden, and I said, if I get a query on epidemics and medicine, can I turn the reporters to you? Because then they'll have a really good source. I can't be a good source on this. They did that, and that's worked out very well. They've informed a lot of people in a lot of ways. But a group of us then, historians who are teaching, historians who work in museums, historians who work in libraries, put together a group called the COVID NYC Documentary Group. And we've been holding meetings since April on how to figure out how to create the best possible network of sources and knowledge of sources in New York City, so we get a 5-borough history of how COVID moved through our city, and make sure that the voices of community people, essential workers, and folks who have suffered most make it into the historical record. And we've gotten support for this from Manhattan Borough President Gail Brewer. She's working to try to raise some money for the project. And we brought together people from the Museum of the City of New York, Brooklyn College, the Queen's Memory Project, the New York Public Library, Fordham University's African American History Project. Our goal is really not to create a giant archive yet, but to create a website down the road so that anybody researching in COVID can go there and find out all the great work that's being done. Because every time I turn around, there's good work being done, and you wouldn't know about it unless there was one place where you could go to find it. So that's really been the single biggest thing I've worked on, and I'll be doing more of that as we go forward. The other thing, it was put on hold by COVID, and I just got back to it, and I think it's really relevant to guides, is I'm working up a book proposal for Cornell University Press on a book that is tentatively called Manhattan 101. It's going to be a collection of short essays about the places, buildings, works of art, works of literature, and ways of life that define Manhattan. And I'm going to be seeking suggestions for entries in that book, and then seeking writers to contribute short essays to that book. And I think there'd be nobody better to do that than the guides who know the really interesting corners of Manhattan,
right,
where they are, why they matter, and they know how to share their passion for that subject with a broad audience, which is exactly what this book aims to do.
Okay.
On the side, in my spare minutes, I'm working on a biography of the late journalist Murray Kempton. But really, my work as Manhattan Borough historian is about the COVID documentary project and getting Manhattan 101 together and make that a book that comes out.
Well, great. Both of those projects are really exciting to hear about, and I'm sure you're going to have lots of people clamoring to want to contribute to either of them. I really look forward to seeing that website, especially about the COVID. And so, Jack Eichenbaum, that sort of fits into what you do. And can you tell us more about digital history? And it sounds very similar. So, Jack.
Okay, we'll come to that later in my discussion. But first, let me introduce myself and my background, which is a little different than my colleagues here. I'm born in Queens. I'm born in Flushing Hospital in 1943. And I don't leave Flushing Bayside until 1963, when I graduate with a bachelor's degree from Cooper Union in engineering. So I leave New York as a chemical engineer in 1963.
Jack, could you speak up? I'm sorry.
I'll be a little closer to the microphone. Can you hear me better now? Good. So I leave New York in 1963 with a bachelor's degree in chemical engineering, but then I don't come back to New York to live until 1976, 13 years later, when I have a PhD in urban geography. I'm not going to go through that tradition with you, but my PhD is in urban geography. And geography, if you've never studied it, is really it's like the flip coin of history. You can't do geography without knowing the history, and you can't do history without knowing the geography. They're handmaidens of one another, although I would say that geography is more of a science than history is, and history is a collection of well-known facts, whereas geography has a lot of science to it. Anyway, I came back to New York in 1976, having left the academic world and wondering what I was going to do with my life, because I liked geography, but I didn't like universities anymore. So I started I came back in 1976, and I started exploring the city that I knew as an engineer, and I suddenly realized how much I could learn by helping people learn geography of the city. And in 1980, I made up a brochure, and I sent it to about 500 colleges that were within a weekend's drive of New York, and they had something urban in their profile, saying that I offered tours of the city. And that began my touring city, my tours of New York City, and I became well known for tours of the city. Meanwhile, I was working at the Department of Finance, which had just embarked on the computerization of the tax valuation system. And the first thing we did was take a picture of every tax lot in the city. And the next thing that we did was start to program the information that we had about every tax lot so that we could use computers to figure out how much they were worth. So I was working with that. And then in 1990, 30 years ago, there was a new technology called Geographic Information Systems. Some of you know what that is. And that basically brings me to the question that Kevin posed to me at the beginning. That's digital history. That's digital geography, where you are becoming and oddly enough, Gail Brewer was a member of Gizmo for a while, and that's how I know Gail. And GIS is a very, very important tool. Think of it as computerized geography and computerized mapping, but it's really much more than that. So I founded that organization, and when I retired from my city work with Department of Finance, that's already, I was 62, I'm 77, 15 years ago. I said the most important thing that I want to do is walking tours. And I am very disappointed with my life at this point because I haven't been able to do them. That was number one. I love giving walking tours. I love meeting the people. I love their questions. I love the way that they meet each other. It's such a wonderful social device. And there are some people out there doing walking tours with masks, but I just think the whole process is inhibited. And by the way, I just want to compliment Lloyd for giving a good overview of what the borough historians do. Are we just about at the centennial of the whole idea of borough historian? I think it's about sometime in the 1920s when the law was passed. I don't know if anybody else knows, Ron or Robert. No? Okay.
So there's a kept record, you said, of all of the borough historians from that time period. Must be kept.
Yes, I was appointed by Helen Marshall, who preceded Melinda Katz, reappointed by Melinda Katz, who has left to become Queen's District Attorney, and it will probably be Donovan Richards from this election, who will become the new borough president. And I've made sure to get to know Donovan Richards, and I hope people will reappoint me as Queensborough historian.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jack. So for our members, if you have any questions, you can start putting them in the Q&A, but I'm going to start out with a question. In some ways, you've already started to answer this, but COVID, of course, this year has been such a momentous year in so many different ways, not just with the COVID pandemic, but the economic fallout of that. All sorts of social issues have arisen in race relations, the Black Lives Matter movement, of course, the politics of both the city and the country is front and center for a lot of us in the past week even. And you've been fielding all of these different questions. I'm curious, from a borough historian, has this time period, have you stumbled, like, for example, Robert Snyder was mentioning that you get inquiries about epidemic histories, historical epidemics. And I personally have learned so much more about like Swinburne Island, and we don't have Staten Island here today, but there's this really interesting history of places where during cholera outbreaks that they would have these quarantine all of these immigrants who were coming in. So I'm just curious, in your research and over the past year, what have you been particularly, do you see echoes or contrast? And are there examples for community efforts to address some of the different types of economic issues and, all of these different types of things that we've all been feeling most immediately this past year? Lloyd, do you want to start us out?
Well, in a sense, the Bronx is a little outlier when it comes to the things that you have mentioned. The largest single employer in the Bronx is Montefiore Hospital. And I always say that, perhaps the Bronx has a sick economy. And there are clinics in every single neighborhood with the various hospitals that are around. But you don't have in the Bronx a lot of public demonstrations. There are, but they're very, very few, and they're hardly ever reported. In fact, when it comes to Black Lives Matter, there's only one mural that was put on the asphalt by the city of New York, and that's right nearby the court buildings on 161st Street and Morris Avenue. We haven't had, that many things in the way of demonstrations or stuff like that. And believe it or not, that's typical. It goes all the way back to the colonial period. The Bronx has always been welcoming the other. One of my favorite stories is what happened in 1943 during World War II, when a lot of people from Black people from the South were coming north in order to get jobs, and a lot of people from Puerto Rico were coming by ship in those days in order to get jobs. And Harlem got overcrowded because of the northern pattern of segregation, which was not supported by law. And a riot broke out. Well, in 1943, some of those Black and Puerto Rican people began crossing the Harlem River into the mud-hated section of the Bronx. And the people who were living there at the time were largely Irish, German, and Jewish. And those guys got together and they welcomed them with open arms. The people in the local PTA said these people have their kids in our school. They deserve to be represented in the executive committee of the PTA. The local merchants got together and said, these guys need jobs. They may not have the skills that we want, but we will hire them anyway, and we will train them. Now, this is 1943, not 1963. And that is just a list of all patterns. I can go back to 1744 and give you similar, similar stories about that. And I talked to somebody earlier this year, pre-pandemic. I was interviewed on a radio show, and with me were a couple of entrepreneurs, who had opened up a facility in the South Bronx. And I happened to mention, something that the Bronx is always welcoming. And a woman there who was one of those entrepreneurs said, you're absolutely right. First time I came to New York, I tried to find a place in every single borough. And the only place where I felt comfortable and welcome was the Bronx. So you don't have that sort of thing. So as I said, the Bronx is the outlier. I don't want to denigrate Ron and his borough, but you always have the you always hear in the on television and the radio and in the newspapers of all the the tension in Crown Heights between one ethnic group and another, and you don't have that here in the Bronx. It's strange, but it's true. I like to say the Bronx is the only borough of the city of New York that's part of the mainland, and so we're the only real Americans in New York City. But that's beside the point. And I just hope that the rest of the country is like the Bronx, and that's in that regard.
All right, so a little bit throwing down the gauntlet there, Ron. Do you want to take up the question? This is what historians do, right?
Right.
Well. This is the second pandemic that I've been involved with. Let's go back to 100 years ago, 1918. Not that I was there, but 2 years ago was the 100th anniversary commemoration of the worst subway accident in the history of New York City. And that happened here in Brooklyn. It was called the Melbourne Street Tragedy. And it happened almost exactly 102 years ago. It was November 1st, 1918. And the gentleman who was operating the train that was involved with the accident, 3 days prior to the accident, he and his wife buried their 3-year-old daughter here in Brooklyn at Holy Cross Cemetery. And that was very much on his mind when he was put into service to operate the train. And he was not a train operator. He was a dispatcher. The Brooklyn Rapid Transit workers were on strike, and the supervisors took people who were not striking. The engineers were striking, and said, okay, there was a 2-hour classroom lesson on how to operate the train. And it caused this terrible, terrible tragedy at a time during the pandemic, exactly 100 years ago. And I was asked by the borough president's office, who was putting together this commemoration for the 100th anniversary of this terrible tragedy, asked if I would be on the panel. And I was, and did a lot of research on it. And now 100 years later, again, we're involved with another pandemic here in New York City. It's a terrible thing. Personally, when everything started, let's say here in the city in March, at the end of March, all of a sudden, I lost my sense of smell and taste for about a week, 7-8 days, no fever, no cough, couldn't smell the food, couldn't taste the food. And then it went away. Like a miracle, it disappeared. All right. And I wish the rest of the COVID-19 would do the same. But, and that was it. No repercussions. And I've been fine since. So go figure that one. I don't know if anyone else has had any experience with that, but my family, we're all fine. And I know 4 people that have died from it. One, some of you may know, I forgot his first name, Heinrich, professor at NYU, wrote a book called The Brooklyn Nobody Knows.
Yes. He was a GANYC member, actually. Yeah.
I'm sorry?
He was a GANYC member.
Oh, okay. Yes. He was a professor, I think it's a City University, City College. And I heard it on the news that he died from COVID-19. This was many months ago. While he was writing the book, he was just about finished, and he called me up and he asked me if I'd be willing to read through his transcript for corrections, if not. And he mailed me this thick envelope in triple spaced and everything. And I found 4 or 5 things that needed correction. He had one neighborhood was in the incorrect neighborhood. There were a couple of spelling mistakes in the name of certain streets and so on. And he made the corrections. When he did a book signing at the Brooklyn Historical Society, I went to buy the book and to meet him. And finally, we get to speak to each other, except over the phone. So, and then several months later, we find out that he passed away from it.
Yeah. He did actually win we have something called the Apple Awards that the GANYC gives out, and that book that you helped edit actually won for Outstanding New Book about New York City back in 2015, and our awards committee chairman brought that up. So, and I'm glad to hear that you and your family are well. But yeah. I think all of us know somebody who's been touched by the disease in one way or the other.
Well, my wife's office is closed, so she's working at home. She's downstairs in the basement, in my Brooklyn Dodger room. But she's got all the she's got a TV, a couch, a refrigerator.
As well?
She got everything down there.
Dodgers fan as well. Did she grow up in Gravesend?
Well, her father grew up in the Bronx, so I think, but she grew up in Brooklyn, in Brighton Beach, and okay,
so maybe a Yankee fan.
And the movie Dirty Dancing, we met at a hotel in the Catskills. We both were working in the same hotel in 1965, and the rest is history.
All right, Rob Snyder.
No, Professor Helmreich's death is a reminder that CUNY has been hit really, really hard by the pandemic. Michael Sorkin, who taught architecture and ran a book publishing series that was really good on illuminating life, not just in New York, but cities around the world. He died as well. And there's some good projects going on at CUNY to get students to work researching the history of the pandemic and its effect on their lives and on their communities. Of all the things that fascinated me about the 1918 flu and the current pandemic, it's the difference in how they are remembered. As far as I know, I checked with the New York State historian on this. There is no memorial to the dead of the 1918 pandemic anywhere in New York State. In fact, we came up with only one monument, and that's in Vermont, and it was opened up in recent times. It's something that was devastating and then left very little public record. And that troubles me for a lot of reasons, because of all the lives dead and lost and not marked. But also, I think if there's no public record of that, there's no commemoration of that, it's harder to begin the task of studying it, understanding it, figuring out what lessons it might hold for our present. Now, what's interesting to me is that today in the pandemic, there are efforts underway to get the deaths of the pandemic commemorated, memorialized. There's a group at CUNY that wants to do an obituary for every New Yorker who was dead in the pandemic. At the same time, there was a great play put on by Public Theater on frontline workers, medical workers, and how they lived through the pandemic, done through oral history interviews. So, and there's also a great little project out on Governor's Island done by Savona Bailey McLean from the West Harlem Arts Fund called Opus Memory, which gets the voices of people remembering the pandemic and the experience alongside a sculpture in a garden. So it encourages you to sit and listen and understand the impact of the event on people. So I think we're quicker to commemorate and remember today, and that's good. But why we didn't commemorate much in 1918, why it was so widely ignored, I can offer thoughts on that. It occurred during World War I. It didn't fit with the national mood of winning the war. It was not the focus of presidential attention. So the media did a lousy job in covering it. I want to be really honest about that. World War I in general was covered under censorship, and that pattern of restraint lasted into responses to the flu epidemic of 1918. So we want to learn from that terrible event of 1918. We got to start from scratch in some places in New York City, and I think it's worthwhile doing.
Kevin, Robert, if I just ask, the part of the commemoration that we did from 1918, the train accident, there is a plaque on the outside street level entrance of the Prospect Park subway station, where the B and the Q train are. There's a beautiful plaque there. And diagonally across the street on the corner of Empire Boulevard and Flatbush Avenue, Empire Boulevard was originally known as Malbone Street. And the subway accident was called the Malbone Street tragedy.
Sure.
And we had a ceremony following the plaque unveiling. We all walked across the street, which is right at the entrance into the Brooklyn Botanic Garden, and we co-named Empire Boulevard Malbone Street Centennial Commemoration. So there is a document that we have that in Brooklyn now.
That's great.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I'm sure a lot of the guides will go look for this plaque now, incorporate it probably on their own walking tours. Jack, do you have anything you'd like to share about how COVID?
I'd like to follow up a little bit about what Ron talked about in the Bronx 75 years ago, about the Bronx being this welcoming place for all different kinds of people. Well, the place that's the welcoming place now is Queens. And it begins pretty much in the 1950s. The 1950s was the first time that New York City lost population. It wasn't much, it was about a total of about 100,000, but most of the loss was in Bronx, Manhattan, and Brooklyn. Queens gained and Staten Island gained, but there was still enough of a loss in the three other boroughs so that the city lost about 100,000 people. Many people were leaving the more crowded boroughs for the country. And in those days, Queens was known as the country. And they were moving into neighborhoods where they would meet people from other parts of the city. And Queens was the welcoming place for people from different boroughs. And typically in apartment buildings built in the 1950s, people from Manhattan, Brooklyn, and the Bronx would be living in the same building and getting to know one another. And Queens played much more of that role in the 80s, when immigrants are coming into this city from all over the world, but particularly Latin America and Asia. And that's when all the old apartment houses get replaced from European immigrants to Latin American and Asian immigrants. And the epicenter of this is Elmhurst. And Elmhurst is where the worst in the beginning of the epidemic was the worst place. And all surrounding Elmhurst Hospital, where many immigrants worked in jobs in Elmhurst Hospital. If you look at the statistics at the beginning of the pandemic in April, that's where the greatest outpouring of the virus was. And I live in Flushing, on the other side of the park. And I live in Asia. 80% of the people who live near me are particularly from Korea and from India and from China. And the occurrence of the virus here in Flushing was so much lower than on the other side of Flushing Meadow Park. And that's because, particularly from China and Korea, they already knew. They were already wearing masks because of the atmosphere and the pollution, and because they already knew what was going on in Asia, and they followed advice from their families in Asia, so that the outbreak of the virus here on the east side of Flushing Meadow Park, here in Flushing, where I live, was much, much lower than on the west side of the park, which is the epicenter of immigrants now. Queens moved from the boring bedroom borough to the center of the world. There is probably no place of any significant population which has a greater variety of people living next door to one another. People under 50 in Queens the children of immigrants have grown up with one another now for 30 and 40 years, and they get along well together. I mean, there is so much. They have different roommates, they have different marriages, they sleep with different people. They get to eat all the cuisines. It's a pretty amazing place when it used to be kind of boring. But that amazement during the pandemic years also led to the spread of the virus a lot. So, yeah.
You know, one thing I just add, I mean, I think New York City's genius for inclusion is one of the best things about it. And yet the inclusion of New York City has limits. We wouldn't have seen the Black Lives Matter demonstrations this summer if African Americans did not have a profound belief, which I think is well justified, that when it comes to them, the city has not lived up to its best promises. And that's varied by neighborhood and it's varied by time. And there has been, you know, great change over time. And I think that's an important thing to grasp, getting that balance right. And I know that from having written about it is so hard. But, you know, for example, when I researched Crossing Broadway about Washington Heights and interviewed African-American men routinely, they would talk about how they were hassled if they went over to the west side of Broadway. There was a famous fire bombing in Washington Heights in the 1950s. I thought I knew about all of that, but then I was embarrassed when a really good book came out about the photographer Ouija, and he took a terrific photograph of an African-American mother and her children framed by the broken glass in the window after a bomb exploded in front of their apartment building. So one of the things that has happened in this summer of COVID, but also the summer of Black Lives Matter, is a reckoning with our city's past. And it's a tough thing to do because we want to balance the real achievements of our city and the distinct characteristics of our boroughs too, but also where we fall short of our highest ideals. And I think there's a lot of work left to be done in understanding all of that. The Bronx Oral History Project, run out of Fordham with Mark Nasom, has done terrific work on that. And they've got a special oral history project about Bronx in the age of the pandemic that's up online now. And it's all very, very good. I want to, you know, tout Mark's work and tout the work of his students, because I think it's a really great chapter in our understanding of the history of the boroughs and our understanding of the history of New York City as well.
Great, thanks for pointing that out. And I agree with your point. And, you know, it's not just our past, but our present as well. For all of the inclusion, many of my Asian American friends and fellow New Yorkers are experiencing a lot of racism, just blatant racism. And they don't have the same type of unity around Black Lives Matter because it's being called these ugly, pernicious names like the China flu and things like that. So it's part of, yes, we are a city of inclusion, but there are moments when you may have seen, I think it was in Brooklyn, where some guy shoved this grandmother onto the subway tracks and everything. So, you know, it's important that we own up to what's going on right in our neighborhoods as well. There's been so much coming in. You were mentioning the paucity of sort of historical documents about the 1918 pandemic. And Susan Katz pointed out that the Tenement Museum is doing a program tomorrow night on the 1918 pandemic that,
very good.
That people
Very
might
good.
be interested in. And then the play that you mentioned with the Public Theater was called The Line. People can, look that up as well.
Excellent play. Excellent.
Yeah, I haven't seen it, but that's Hardy Phippen also saw it and said it was excellent as well. Very moving. So I'm going to look for that as well. So one of the questions is to all of you: how often do all of the historians meet together and or produce any all boroughs works? Is there something out there that we can look up at the New York Public Library or at the Brooklyn Library?
Library. Well, first of all, we used to meet a heck of a lot more frequently. I always like to say that the 5 borough historians would get together from time to time and talk over old times. But for some reason that seemed to decline for the past couple of years. And now with the pandemic, it becomes almost impossible for us to get together. I look forward to the time when the 5 of us will get together. We used to, exchange meeting sites and go around in the 5 boroughs and see things that are there, different borough each meeting. But we do, from time to time, at least perhaps on a one-to-one basis, on a telephone or something like that, would talk and say, listen, I found this sort of thing, you'd be interested in that, but that's rare. And but we do have that in mind. Now, as far as a 5 borough history, I had a dream. That sounds familiar. I have a dream that we could have a 5-volume history of the Bronx. Each volume covering the history of each one of the boroughs, each one written by one of us. Now, that's a dream. I don't know if it'll ever achieve reality, but I think it's, if we ever get together and do that, I think it would be worthwhile and would be a legacy to future generations.
A 5-volume work on the Bronx or about New York?
No, there would be a volume on the Bronx, a volume on Brooklyn, a volume on Manhattan, a volume on Queens, a volume on Staten Island. And frankly, despite what I just said, it would all be on paper.
No, we should definitely dine when conditions permit. But I will say this, I mean, if Cornell, which is interested in this idea of a book called Manhattan 101, if that works, they want to do Bronx 101, Brooklyn 101, Staten Island 101, Queens 101. So there would be a collection of essays on each borough, right? And, I feel like a certain burden to get this off the ground right. But if I do, it would open up the door for other books on the other boroughs to come afterwards. And I think that would really be great, because I think it would be a good collection, a nice 5-volume collection that would go a long way towards meeting the goal that I think you've very usefully identified. Let me just say one more thing on the COVID documentary project. I send out emails with all you guys when I send out invites. I'll keep sending them. We've got people from just about every borough. Staten Island is the outlier on that. And I would like to get people from Staten Island involved, because when the website is up, it really will invite people from all 5 boroughs to contribute, but also give them a sense of the resources that are available in their own borough, but all around the city in all the 5 boroughs. So I'm hoping that'll be a common touchstone for everybody.
I think
Robert,
You were trying to get in.
a bit naive.
a problem.
Continue thinking of New York City history in terms of boroughs. There is so much to learn from understanding the interaction between boroughs. In many ways, Queens grows out of Brooklyn, and Brooklyn grows out of Manhattan, and the Bronx grows out of Manhattan, and Staten Island grows out of Brooklyn. And there's so much interaction between the boroughs that really has been not discussed and really is part of the vibrancy of New York.
It was one of the reasons why we decided right away to make it a COVID NYC documentary project and not a borough by borough project. All 5 boroughs would get represented in it, but it would be crazy to look at a borough in isolation. It's exactly the interaction between people. Look, workers who come from the Bronx to work in Manhattan and bring COVID back home, it contributes to the death rate. It's part of the problem, right?
Ron, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I think the idea of a history of each of the boroughs is fantastic, but inevitably, if and when this is published, there's so much information that once it's published, you're going to get responses from people who say, hey, you left this out or you left that out. You didn't do this, you didn't do that. Because there's so much history involved with each of the 5 boroughs that invariably something is going to be left out, and you're going to hear about it.
Well, invariably, in every history, something is left out. You cannot put down every possible thing. It reminds me of the old story that is told about the historian of a town in the Midwest who sat down to write a history of his town and never got beyond the fall of the Roman Empire. So,
I study Chinese history, so I understand that that rabbit hole. It's a big, so much. Actually, regarding the COVID memorials, fellow board member Deborah Blau, she writes that there's a temporary Day of the Dead memorial that's currently on display at the St. Mark's in the Bowery, and it's very moving. So both, and it should be documented. She mentioned, so that might be something both our members and also our panelists are interested in. Yeah. We're running out of time. We do have one last question. It's sort of a fun question from Jim Carr, and it's to all of you. And I don't know if you've read it or if you have an opinion about it, but the late Pete Hamill, his novel Forever. What did you think?
I never read it.
Never read it. Okay.
I liked it. I have a great fondness for Pete, and I think he helps us understand the relationship between the city's past and present, which is really fluid in lots of ways. I think one of the things that's striking about New York City is people are so focused on what's happening today that they forget that there are layers upon layers of history with real consequences underfoot. And I thought in his own way in that novel, he sort of conveyed that to people, and I liked that very much.
Yeah. I'm an Irish American as well, so Irish New Yorker, so I have a for him as well.
Kevin?
Yeah.
The interesting thing about doing walking tours in the neighborhoods, so many people who live in these neighborhoods that come on the walking tours, and they come on the tours, and they've been living in the neighborhood for X number of years, some 20 years, 30 years, and even more. They walk around, they follow the tour, and they go, I didn't know that. And it's yet the street that they lived on.
Yep.
Why are the trees on the lawns and not at the curb? Why all of a sudden the trees on the lawn halfway down the block, all of a sudden the trees are at the curb? And that goes back to the history when the farmland was purchased and the developers bought a farmland, and that was a dividing line. And there's a person who lived on the house right at that borderline and never knew why the trees are different. And this is what is so exciting about doing walking tours.
And history as well, right? So, yeah. Well, great. And that's also why we have Tour Your Own City. And so thank you so much for joining us, gentlemen. I'm going to hand it over to our Vice President, Mike Morgenthal, who was mentioned with the Tour Your Own City. And you can take a tour, all of those fellow neighbors, they can find a tour on Tour Your Own City, and they can take a tour of their own neighborhood that they will learn, I think, a lot from members like Jack Eichenbaum, right? So thank you again, gentlemen. Was there any last words that you wanted to share? Or Michael, did you want to say something?
Just one quick thing. There was one other question that I thought would be better answered in the chat room. Someone posed the question wondering if there are, if each of you have websites that are specific to your role as borough historian. If you have them, probably the easiest thing to do is just type them in the chat room so people can click on them directly once we're done with this discussion. But yeah, I didn't want to interrupt if any of the 4 historians had any final thoughts before we move on to other business.
Well, I would like to make one mention of something. We were talking about the 1918, and we're talking about the COVID-19. One, of course, of the most infamous incidents, medical incidents in the city of New York that's mostly known is, of course, Mary Mallon, who was known as Typhoid Mary, who was hired by many people to work in the kitchen and sort of that, but she happened to be a person who transmitted typhoid without having it herself. And she eventually wound up living in more or less exile in North Brother Island, which is part of the Bronx. And she is actually buried in St. Raymond's Cemetery in the Bronx. And it's interesting that when you see her grave, it's, it's plain stone. But there are a number of stones that have been placed on top of her headstone. And it's a Catholic cemetery. And yet this is a Jewish tradition to put when you visit a grave, you put a stone on top of that headstone. So there are people who sort of sympathize with her because it was really, not much that she could do with her own situation in life. But in that sense, if you want to talk about one of the most famous or infamous medical situations that happened in the city of New York, there is Mary Mellon's grave in the St. Raymond Cemetery.
Great. That's
well, thank you again, gentlemen, for joining us. We really appreciate you taking the time out.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you, Robert. Thank you, Lloyd. Thank you, Jack. Thank you, Ron. This was great to kind of continue the one question that was asked. Perhaps when we're through the COVID rabbit hole, GANYC can be a host for a meeting of all the borough historians, although I think we would probably have a big argument about which borough we would have to host that meeting in. So it would be a little bit of a sticking point, but I'm sure we can work through that. But in case, gentlemen, you didn't have a chance to look in the comments.
I think it will be the cheapest place, right, Michael?
Yes, well, that goes without saying. But in case you didn't have a chance to look at the comments, so many of our guides were really appreciative of your discussion tonight. Obviously, we're a natural born audience for the expertise that you guys all have, and we would love to have you back down the road, both individually and as a collective group. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Also, once again, if any of you do have a website that is specifically for your work as a borough historian, we would encourage you to post it in the chat room here on the Zoom call so that our members can see it and click on it. So that would be great. And thank you very much to Kevin for conducting and hosting this lively discussion, and the Education Committee for pulling together all four of these distinguished panelists. So without further ado, just in case you don't know, I am Mike Morgenthal. I'm one of the two vice presidents of the Guides Association. And for anybody who came in late, I'm pinch hitting for Emma Guest-Gonzalez, our esteemed president, who had to duck out for a very important family affair tonight. Her daughter turned 21 years old, and you can read into that what's going to happen later this evening in Manhattan with the Gonzalez family. But in any event, I'm going to conduct the rest of the meeting. I just wanted to make one quick mention at the top. Emma mentioned the award that we were given at GANYC for our Tour Your Own City program. Even though my name went on the award, I just want to make sure I acknowledge some of the other key people in developing Tour Your Own City, including Deborah Blau, Megan Murad, Jeremy Wilcox, and members of the entire GANYC board. And I'm probably forgetting a few other people, but we continue to work on it. And as Emma mentioned, it's even if we're not booking a lot of tours through that, the exposure, I think, is continuing to lift GANYC's profile and profile of tour guides throughout New York, even with the current conditions going on. So with that said, we are going to turn to committee reports right now. And so we are going to, our first committee report is from the Education Committee. And that means Nina Mende is up. And Nina, I will make you a panelist and you can start your discussion. Now, there we go. Okay, great. And Nina, you just have to unmute yourself. We don't see you, but we should be able to hear you if you unmute yourself. Hello, Nina, are you there? Okay, seems like we might be having some technical issues there in terms of getting Nina unmuted. So tell you what, while we work on that, why don't we, oh, there you are. Are you there, Nina? No, okay. Why don't we move on to our next committee report, and we'll circle back to Nina in just a second. So we can move on to the membership committee. Very, very busy time of year for the membership committee. As Emma talked about, we are now accepting renewals, and please, please, please renew. The renewals are lifeblood of how GANYC works. And so to discuss the membership committee, we will turn it over to the committee chairman, Derek Chan. Derek, it is all you.
Great. Thanks a lot, Mike. And hello, everybody. I'm Derek Chan, the Membership Committee Chair. And I just wanted to welcome, very special welcome to all of our members, as well as our non-members. We're always glad that you're here to join us for our monthly membership meetings. And I also did just want to recognize everyone for wherever you happen to be around the world. We do have members outside the United States. We have members throughout the country as well. And whenever you happen to be watching this, whether now live or later on, as this does get recorded and will be available in our GANYC digital library. For all of our members, it's just ganyc.org/library to access the digital library. As Emma did mention, and as we do know, we are in our renewal season right now. And this is actually a really great time to become a member if you're not a member already. And one of the reasons why is because you actually get bonus time right now. So if you become a member between now and the end of the year, your membership dues will cover not only the rest of 2020, but also all of 2021. So you do get a little bit of extra bonus time. And we do already have 4 new provisional members who have taken advantage of that bonus time. And I do want to recognize them now. Our newest provisional members, our newest members of GANYC are Tim Lee, Giancarlo Malchiati, Renee Ruiski, and Garrett Shore. So welcome to those 4 new provisional members. We also do have 4 new full members. These are members who were provisional members, but they've met the requirements for becoming full members. That means being a member of GANYC for a minimum of 1 year as a provisional member, and also having received 2 letters of recommendation from full members. And they are Mitch Bach, Ely Murad, Deborah Steigerwald, and Jason Thompson. So welcome to those new full members. They also have attended 4 monthly membership meetings, including virtual ones like this one, as well as perhaps ones that we had pre-pandemic in person as well. Our current active membership currently is 385. So we have a total of 385 members right now. And also recently, last week, we did have a new member orientation. We did have that available online. We did have a number of new members, provisional members who were in attendance of that. It was a time when we were emphasizing the resources, the benefits, as well as the structure of GANYC. And if you missed that, it was recorded and is also available on our website. And this is available not just for new provisional members, but also full members. Maybe if you want a reminder of some of the benefits, resources that are available, it's very easy to access. You can just go to the benefits page on our website, ganyc.org/benefits. Very easy to access. It's up at the top. You can watch that at your leisure. And that's the report for the membership committee.
Great. Thank you, Derek. Are there any questions for Derek before we move on to our next committee report? And Derek, thank you for all the work you're doing with the membership committee. You've really made it your own and are doing yeoman's work. We really, all GANYC members appreciate all the hard work you're doing. So thank you so much. Okay, if there are no questions, I think Nina is now ready to go. Nina, can we hear you?
Yes.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead, Nina.
Okay,
this is the Nina Mende reporting on the Education Committee.
Yes. Hi. I will talk about thank everyone for all the tours they did this past month, and we have an index of all the past FAM tours with guys' emails. And so if you want to take an encore with in-person tours, I know we have a limited amount of people because of COVID who could go on each tour. You can just email. A lot of guys will do private tours for GANYC members. One of them, November 4th, Joe Spalak did a tour. That's today. What's today? Yeah. When New York was New Amsterdam, and he could only take 5 people. He only wants to take 5 GANYC members on a tour. And he had 2 encores, November 10th and 11th. But if you want to take a repeat of his tours, any tour that he's given us, he'd be happy to do it. He just takes about 5 people at a time and just joespalak@live.com. Now, coming up tomorrow, we have a continuation of GANYC Celebrates the Met at 1:50, where we have individual guides taking virtual tours of their favorite parts of the Met. And this one coming up is by Robin Garr, and she's going to do, her tour is called Highlights in Paper, Prints and Drawings Department in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And it's a virtual tour. If for some reason you can't take it tomorrow, we're going to have a link where you can and take it at your leisure. But what's nice is that if you take it tomorrow at 2 o'clock, you can be a part of the chat. If you have any questions to ask Robin, you can. But this is a very exciting series, and we thank Kevin Lawrence for hosting it. And we've had a lot of great tours, and they're listed in the index that have happened already. But if you miss them, you can tune in with our virtual library, and that goes for all our virtual tours. Now, coming up, a debut fall foliage tour in Central Park with Monia Bonaldo, and this is going to be our first tour for our GANYC members, so we're very excited about that. And November 10th, and British Lower Manhattan with Stanley O'Connor, and that is also open to GANYC members. And then, of course, coming up tomorrow, the Art and Susan Zuckerman, if you RSVP at marscott@AT&T.net, you can sign up for their free Zooms for GANYC members, and they have guest lecturers now on these Zooms. And if you have expertise and you want to share it, you can contact Art and Susan and be a part of their tour. Now, the one thing about the Met at 1:50, sometimes you don't feel, if you're starting out doing Zoom tours and you're not, you don't want to do a whole Zoom. What's nice is you can participate in a group Zoom tour. And we did this women's monument tour earlier this summer. But if you want to do be a part of a group tour, I have a favorite painting at the Met, then contact Kevin Lawrence and we'll put together some kind of group tour. So that's in the works. And coming up January 14th, 2021, we're doing another virtual seminar. Thanks to Jim Carr for getting this whole thing going. And this and all our education counterparts and training counterparts at the DC Guild. And this is an event that they host every year, and they've invited GANYC and the Philadelphia Guides Association to participate. And it's going to be a virtual seminar on presidential inaugurations. New York will be covering the inauguration of George Washington, the first one in 1789. Philadelphia will be covering two inaugurations, one of George Washington and one of John Adams. And Washington, D.C. will handle subsequent presidents. And they do have an expert, Steve Livengood, and he's the chief guide and director of public programs at the U.S. Capitol Historical Society. So we're looking forward to that. And we're going to have some follow-up meetings with our associations early in the year, different committees, where it's a lot of fun meeting each other. And refer to our index. If you wanted, we also, Kevin Fitzpatrick did a wonderful tour of F. Scott and Zelda Fitzgerald, and he's going to be doing some encores, and you can contact him if you want to know the dates. And we'll be putting everyone's email in the index. So now you have a whole bunch of people who've shared their knowledge with you that you can tap into. And we'll also have a guest speaker index. And if you want to do, if you have an idea for a guest speaker or a FAM tour or a professional development program, please contact us. Don't be shy. We do have some forms that you can, online forms, very easy to fill out with your idea, and we'll respond ASAP. So thanks, everyone.
Great, thank you, Nina. Does anybody have any questions for Nina about any of the activities with the Education Committee? Okay, well, if you have questions, feel free to post them. Just a quick side note, I worked as a poll worker yesterday in our neighborhood in the East Village. Nina and I are part of the GANYC East Village Mafia, and it was great to catch up with Nina as she came in to cast her vote. So it was really awesome to see that, and I hope you guys all were able to go out and vote yesterday, or in early voting prior to that. So okay, great. So last but not least, we are going to have our final committee report of the evening, and that is from the one and only chair of the newsletter committee, the one and the only Dave Gardner. And Dave, I'm making you a panelist right now, so you should be popping in there in just a second. Go ahead, Dave.
Am I on?
You are on.
Oh, wait.
You're on audio, not video. There you are.
Oh, okay. Good evening, everybody. Boy, I missed my my running entrances. So, first of all, on a note about GANYC in general, you notice I'm wearing my lanyard, but I would like to thank Derek Chan, who just spoke for us, for the badge he just sent us. Sorry, I can't see that, I know well, but he sent us a goodie bag of badges, business cards. So thank you for that, Derek. Now, as for the newsletter itself, yes, it's out. And here it is. It's, hold on a second, let me get rid of my background here. Okay, so newsletter. It's
Hey, if you just sunk the Titanic.
Oh, yes, that's a big tour I'm working on, by the way. But as a matter of fact, I'm calling in from the, here's the presses now, and I'm in the mailroom. So they're working on it. But the newsletter, it's out, and it's going to have a big story about tour your own city and so on and so on. Not out tonight, but it's in the mail and should be in mailboxes very soon. Now, on a couple other notes, if you don't mind indulging me, yes, I've also renewed, and I have also been written up in the Saturday Evening Post. Nothing about GANYC specifically, but there's not one, not two, but 3 references to touring and tour guiding. So that's out right now. I can even drop a link for it as it is, but that's the thing of it. So look for our newsletters, especially the story about Tour Your Own City, and that'll be in mailboxes for anybody that wants to get them. And if you want to be on the mailing list, write Linda and she'll put you on. It's not automatic because a lot of people don't want to be having things coming in the mail.
Okay,
Questions?
great. Yeah, Dave, you usually also mention the deadline for the next issue, if you know it.
Oh,
sorry to put you on the spot.
Well, you have all of the holidays off. It's going to be early January. Can't exactly recollect the number right now, but I've figured it all out so that everybody has, holidays are clear. And after holiday, that gives me January to have it ready for the February meeting. But I'll definitely, I'll put that in a post or something.
Okay, that's great. Any questions for Dave or about the newsletter? Okay, great. Thank you, Dave. And thank you to all of our committee chairs who reported tonight. I just wanted to make one more mention about renewals. As we said, it is how GANYC is able to pay for FAM tours and all the other products and other things that we're able to share with our membership. And so it is vitally important. We know that things are a little uncertain right now in terms of our industry, but by maintaining networking and professional development via PDPs and FAM tours and other online things that we've developed, that's only possible by membership fees. So I encourage you all to renew as soon as possible, but not just that. There's about 60 people, 60 or so, who are on the chat, on the Zoom for most of the evening tonight. Talk to your fellow members who were not on the chat tonight, on the Zoom tonight, and encourage them to renew as well. It's super important, and we really hope that you guys will all renew as early as you possibly can. So that really wraps up everything we have on the agenda for tonight. Before we close, I just want to see if anybody has any other business they would like to discuss. You can post a quick note in the chat room or in the Q&A? Okay, and board members, does anybody else have anything that you would like to add?
Yes, hello, I'm Jeremy Wilcox, your treasurer. I just wanted to add, obviously, as Emma mentioned, ideally, the easiest way for you to be renewing is just to do so online. If you are mailing your payments, please double check the address. The payments, the check should be made out to GANYC. And when you send it to the 25 Broadway address, make sure you have GANYC, 25 Broadway, 9th floor. It's very important that you add that part. I think if you like Google GANYC, it'll have our full address. GANYC, 25 Broadway, 9th floor, New York, New York, 10004, off the top of my head. And so you make sure you get the address properly so we get it. I'll be going to the office during the renewal period at least every 2 weeks to check all of that and make sure that, you know, if you get your payments, we get those processed in. But if you do mail your payment, obviously the renewal won't be processed until I get it, and then you'll be updated when we do.
Great, thank you, Jeremy. And this is also a busy time for Jeremy, as you can imagine, with all the renewals. So thank you so much for taking care of all of that for the association. So anybody else from the board? Looks like John, were you about to say something, or are you just getting antsy? Okay, cool. Great. So we are going to wrap things up on behalf of the entire board. Thank you so much. Just a quick note, our next membership meeting will be Wednesday, December 2nd, I believe is the date. Yes, Wednesday, December 2nd. So look for a notice about that. It'll be our final Zoom meeting of the year. And like Emma said at the top, it's going to be an interesting few days, few weeks, few months, perhaps, in and around these parts. So everybody just stay safe, stay sane, stay sanitary, and we hope to see you guys all again soon. So thank you so much. Have a great night.